Our first reader is Thomas Clark. Thomas is a Glaswegian writer and poet, now based in Hawick. His work has been described by William McIlvenney as Glasgow reflected in a broken mirror through shards of memory, anecdote and place, and by Macmillan, who's a Yorkshire writer, as subtle and excellent in its persuasive and longing and hanging on. He writes about sport for the Hawick News and the world for everyone else. Give a big round of applause for Mr. Thomas Clark.
Thanks William, and thanks everybody who's here. I'm going to read a short story, fairly short story, called "And the Noise That They Made Was Like Laughing." Names were just noises things made about themselves. They made them sometimes when they pointed at their faces, and their eyes went big, and their mouths went wide. Mama, mama, that was the noise this one made. Today, when it put him down on the ground, everything was cold and wet. He didn't like it, so he made a noise about himself. Bobby! And the mama's eyes went water when he said it. They picked him up and spun him round and barked at him in the air. Then, when it put him back down, he fell over, and some of the ground went into his mouth, and it tasted bad. He didn't want to be picked up again, so he didn't cry. His tongue was sticking out, and he rubbed his hand against his mouth. The ground came off and stuck to his hand, and he looked at it. It was green, but it tasted brown. The wet was all over his face, and on his hand, but not on his eyes. If the wet was on his eyes, the mama picked him up, and put him somewhere else, and he didn't want to be somewhere else. He wanted to be here, where the mama could not see him, with its face. Suddenly, he was touched by something cold, and the cold made a noise about itself, and the noise it made was shh. All around him, louder and louder, the cold thing said itself, in his ears and onto his skin, and in the blue clothes the mama took from her basket and hung up in the sky. One of them jumped down and ran off across the ground as the flowers dived out of its way. Amazed, Bobby fell forward onto the ground and lay there, flat amongst the yellows and the greens. He watched the blue thing tumble along, end after end, until he almost couldn't see it. Then he grabbed the ground with both his hands and pulled it hard towards him. As it got closer, he could see the blue thing had stopped and was beating itself on the fence's bottom, trying to squeeze through its spaces. There was more ground on the other side, but it was grey and white and hadn't anything on it. By the time Bobby got to it, the blue thing had got tired and had fallen to the ground and lay there, panting. He picked it up. It looked like the things the mama put on his hands sometimes, but they were dry, and this was wet. He tried to let it go, but it grabbed onto his hand and hung there, and its hair wrapped round his fingers. Bobby! He shouted, moving his hand away. The blue thing was not Bobby. He was. Some things did not make noises about themselves, so the mama made noises about them, and that's what they were called. Sky, the mama said. Grandma, the mama said. Drum, it had never said. But he knew that was what they were called, the things on the other side of the fence. They looked at him through its spaces with their giant yellow eyes. Drum, one of them said. Their eyes were big and their teeth were mouthful, and sometimes they stopped and looked at Bobby, and sometimes they didn't. They never looked at the mama, and she never looked at them. The drums were all the same, but they were different sizes and ate everything. There were drums everywhere, even in the sky, but the mama never made noises about them, and neither did anybody else. Even when it was dark, and all he could hear was the drums shouting outside, nobody said anything. Sometimes Bobby tried to say the drums to mama, but she just made the same noises that she always did. Good Bobby, clever Bobby. And it didn't matter whether he'd said lolly, or kitty, or drum, because the only noise she knew was her name, and anything else he tried to say, she didn't know. One of the drums was right next to the fence now, and its eyes looked at Bobby between the spaces. Its face was bright, and its mouth was burning, and it hurt Bobby's eyes just to look at it. He'd never been so close to one before, His teeth were pointing forward at him, and it got bigger and bigger until there was no more space left in the fence, just the eyes and the mouths and the faces of the drooms. "Bobby," he told them, frowning. "Bobby." "Droom," they kept on saying. "Droom, droom." He could not shout for the heat from their mouths. Hair was sprouting out of them, black and thin, and it filled his eyes and his ears and was everything. "Bobby," he tried to shout. "Bobby!" Then someone else was crying his name, and he was up in the air again, and everything was blue. The mama was patting him on his back, and he was looking over its shoulder, and the drooms were small again, and far away. "Droom!" he shouted, stretching his hand towards them. "Droom!" "Mama," it said, pointing at itself. "Mama!" "Droom!" he kept on shouting. "Droom! Droom!" They looked at him with their eyes. "Droom," one said to the other, and the noise that they made was like laughing. Thank you.